Hi, everybody. Okay, today we're going to talk a bit about working with sellers, right? We know that, most of our businesses are constructed of working with either a buyer or a seller. Today we're going to talk a bit about working with sellers and why that's an effective way to grow and create your business. So, when we're working with sellers, there's a great quote that I like by Jim Cathcart, which is when we're wanting to create an outcome for our business, basically the quote goes like this: become the person who would attract the results you seek. Right. And that's a powerful quote to me, because it's like you really want to take some time and grow and develop so that you can be the person that attracts the people that you want to work with. Okay. How do we do that? We know that, working with a seller can be a challenge. We've talked in previous sessions about overcoming fear energy, how to handle objections, things like that. We're going to apply all those things when we're talking about working specifically with the customer, either the buyer or the seller. So today, our learning objectives are going to be the psychology behind motivation, questions to help uncover motivations of the seller, tactics to move forward from contract to close, and then our outcome should be learning to close more listings, right? If your business model is focused on you being more of a listing agent than a buyer's agent, today should help to start to establish the framework so that you can be more successful when you're working with a seller. So, as we get started, what is our why? Why are we wanting to work with a seller? What's the difference between a buyer and a seller, right? I know it sounds basic, it sounds simple, but it helps us to understand our why. Why am I choosing to work with this client type more specifically than this client type, right? In this case, it's a seller. We know that when we're working with sellers, we have the ability to control our own time, right? That's contrastly different than when we're working with buyers. When we're working with buyers, we're able to control some time, right? But when we're showing properties, sometimes the properties we've selected and the buyers have agreed to see aren't the ones that they actually want. So when working with a seller, we have the ability to control our time. And we know part of the reason why we do what we do, transact real estate or work with customers, is so that we can control our time and our income. So working with a seller allows us better control over our time. It also allows us to get our name out there. It's brand recognition. It's an effective way to communicate to the public our local brand, which enables us to get more opportunities to work with more and more sellers, right? They see our information. They see our brand out in the community. So that's another valuable reason why we want to work with a seller. It presents a consistency of income. We are the storefront, right? When we're working with a buyer, we're going around from storefront to storefront. In other words, every house we go see is someone else's store because it's someone else's product. When we're working with a seller, we are the ones who have the product. So people come to see us. So it allows for more of a consistency of income. And we know that when a home is priced correctly, it's more likely to sell. So that creates a more predictable income for us. Okay. As I said, we become the employers, right? When we have inventory that we can control, the buyer's agent becomes the employee because now they're bringing the customer around to your store. So it allows us to become employers when we're working with sellers. Okay. How do we understand a seller's motivation? What are those key factors that helps us to understand a seller's motivation? As we look at that, we want to come from the principle of abundance, the state or feeling of having a relative degree of plentifulness, right? When we're working with a seller, again, we're the employer. We've gone, and that listing appointment is literally us just going and evaluating our next workspace, right? That's a principle of abundance. We feel like we have enough versus operating from that principle of scarcity, which is the state of being or feeling without or not having enough of something. And we often feel that way when we're working with buyers because we're dependent on someone else's inventory. We're also dependent on the buyer's state of being. And do they like the product or service? of someone else that we're showing. Okay. Um, so that's all that speaks to our mindset. Both abundance and scarcity are inner states that manifest as your reality, right? You believe either one or the other. You believe that you're coming with plenty of opportunity in that state of abundance, or that you're not having enough in that state of scarcity. So when we are abundant thinkers, we see material things as material, tangible items that don't really hold power over us unless we let them, right? That's that abundance thinking, or coming from that state or that principle of abundance versus scarcity. That's all about our mindset. Sellers are buyers. Sellers are nothing more than previously fulfilled buyers. Typically, sellers aren't overly sophisticated. They bought a house at some point, they've held on to it for a period of time, and now they're wanting to sell it. But I guarantee they've probably forgotten all of that process they went through when they initially bought that house. And systems and procedures and guidelines may have changed a bit since they purchased. So keep in mind, is a seller is nothing more than a fulfilled buyer, someone who bought at some point in the past is now ready to sell. And then they may have done that a few different times. Okay. So when we're prospecting for a seller, what are some of the best methods of prospecting for a seller? In my opinion, the best days to prospect are usually Wednesdays and Thursdays, right? In all of our lives, we have that Monday and Tuesday malaise. In other words, we're coming off of a weekend. We're thinking about the task-specific things that we have to do for the upcoming weekend, for the upcoming week. So we're wanting to fulfill those items. Wednesdays and Thursdays, we start to relax and think about the upcoming pleasure that we're moving towards, called the weekend, right? That's why Wednesday's called hump day. We're over the difficult things in our week, at least perceptively, and we're moving towards those things that provide us pleasure, like the weekend, spending times with friends and family, or simply relaxing, right? Or getting to a different state of work. So Wednesday and Thursdays are statistically the best days to work on task-specific assignments like prospecting. Typically, a seller is a bit more relaxed. They're not frantic about what was in their initial work week, and they're more amenable to talk to you. Okay. So Wednesdays and Thursdays, my opinion. You might have a different experience, but my opinion. Listen first, right? Don't present solutions before you understand if there's a problem. All too often, as real estate professionals, and again, we're overcoming our own nervousness and our discomfort, we tend to assume the wrong thing. We tend to start to ask, hey, are you looking to buy or sell, before we even know what that person is about. In earlier sessions, I mentioned about, it's kind of like the process of dating. We don't ask for the thing, whatever the thing may be, before we even ask the person's name, right? We want to get to know them. We want to create a relationship. Relationships are the establishment of trust. So we want to make sure that we're actively listening, constantly actively listening, before we even set out to provide any sort of solution. We want to make sure that we understand the problem, or if there is even a problem. And then we start to create options. Solutions over sales goals. Someone may want to refinance, but it doesn't mean that they want to sell. You want to become that ultimate resource, because they'll remember you in the long term. Ultimately, the goal is obviously for you to get the sale, be able to list the property, and move that seller forward. But that may not happen, right? So create the relationship. Create FOMO. What is FOMO? FOMO is fear of missing out, right? You want to let that seller know, listen, interest rates are on the rise, or prices are at an all-time high. You want to make sure you're getting maximum equity out of your home over the time that you've had it. It gives us an opportunity to help you find your replacement home. Create FOMO, fear of missing out. Okay. And then social confirmation or proof. Other folks in your neighborhood are doing the same thing, right? I know someone just down the street from you who listed their home at $1 million. Now, I know you probably purchased this home somewhere in the $600,000 range, according to public records, right? So social proof, other people in your neighborhood have done it. it might be beneficial for you to do the same thing. So fear of missing out, or FOMO, and social confirmation or proof. Okay. Again, I talked about buyers and sellers essentially being the same person, but what's the difference between a buyer and a seller? Right? We know that a buyer, when we work with a seller, it's important to understand life from a buyer's perspective. Buyers are always searching. They're the hunters. They're looking for the best opportunity for their particular situation. Okay. A buyer's motivation is to maintain what they already have. A buyer looks to see what they can keep in their pocket. A seller is slightly different from that. The seller, in many ways, is similar to the buyer. A typical seller is not too far removed from the position of being a buyer. The sellers were once buyers before that hunt was fulfilled. In other words, they found what they were hunting for, and they were able to feed. So now they're fulfilled. A seller's motivation is the seller's looking to see what they can put in their pocket. Right? A buyer's motivation is to see what they can keep in their pocket. The seller's looking for what they can put in their pocket. So the ultimate goal, no matter what you hear, is the seller's looking for the best price, the least amount of inconvenience, and the best possible outcome. Okay? That's a seller's motivation. Sellers and buyers are uniquely different, but also very much the same. What do sellers want? Sellers want you to understand that they're emotional through this. They've raised their family. They're very sentimental about the home. They've done some things that was unique and specific for them that they're very proud of. And they want others to be proud of those things too. But we know that a buyer wants to come in and insert themselves in that house to make that house their home. Okay. So they're a bit sentimental. There's sentimentality. They have pride of ownership. They have one-upmanship. My home is much better than Joe Smith's down the street, even though we have the floor plan, because I did marble flooring and he only did ceramic, right? And then we want to talk about their home replacement strategies. They're typically wanting to move in something that has equal impact as the home that they're selling. So it's important to understand their home replacement strategies. There's what I call away from pain and towards pleasure. Excuse me. Even when we're happy with what we have, there are things that create pain for us. Like if we know we need to upgrade or replace broken items, things like that. Then we start to dream. If I had a new house, I wouldn't have to worry about these things. Plus, I would have all these additional upgrades. Whereas in the home I'm in now, I'm going to have to put in those features or benefits that don't exist in my home at present. Okay, so that's what's known as away from pain and towards pleasure. We're allowing them to dream. We're allowing them to voice their frustrations, and we're helping them to work towards that dream. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if I were to find your replacement home today, what would that look like? Now you're getting them to talk about what that looks like. If money was no object, what would that house look like? You're getting them to think about what their next transition would look like versus where they are presently. And you also want to push the frustrations of where they are presently. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you said that, you're going to have to replace the furnace next year, and, it doesn't have a pool, or it doesn't have some of the features that you were hoping to have in your home. Now's that opportunity. Away from pain and towards pleasure. Okay. It allows them to express their vision. Again, getting them to dream is a way to get them motivated, right? And we have to help them identify and understand their goals. We know that their number one goal, always statistically, best price. They want to get the best price, the shortest marketing time, with the least amount of inconvenience. That's a seller's goal. Intrusion, inconvenience is a disruption of a lifestyle. It creates stress. It creates disharmony. We're wanting to move them away from that stress and that disharmony. That's our goal, right? So when we're presenting our marketing presentation, keep in mind, we don't list a house, we market a house, right? We call it affectionately a listing, but realistically, our job is to market the house to where we can find an appropriate buyer to sell this property. So our number one job is to get the listing. Sellers hire an agent who will communicate, pay attention to detail, demonstrate knowledge, follow through, and provide excellent service. That's each and every one of you. Again, we've talked a lot in previous sessions about practice, practice, practice. You want to practice. You want to make sure that you know what's going on in the market, that you're saying the right things at the right time, that you're communicating effectively, that you're listening to your seller and you're paying attention to the details that will get the home sold for the most amount of money with the least inconvenience. Okay. So we want to make sure it gets priced right the first time. It's important to understand the market. It's crucial. It's vital that you understand what's transacting, not just what the seller wants to hear, but what's actually happening. So we need to make sure that we have full alignment with our sellers. We want to explain to the seller what their responsibilities are during this process so that things will go smoothly. There's nothing worse than when there's a communication error or a misalignment between you and your customer. It makes for a very frictional relationship. Again, we want to continue to create an understanding of what their motivation is. We want to establish cooperation between the seller and ourselves. We want to make sure that there's a complete understanding. Okay. We want to provide that layer of trust to where they want to continue to work with us. We want to explain to them what we do and what our responsibilities are, that they understand the process that we're going through with them. Again, agents sometimes forget that sellers are not sophisticated. They are buyers who were once on the hunt that are now fulfilled. So we want to make sure that they're constantly in the know of what's happening, right? The more they're in the know, the less frustration that's going to be created. We're managing the expectation for them. It allows us to preempt future problems with that effective communication. We also want to make sure that we're asking the right questions. It allows us to uncover hidden motivations of the seller, right? If at that marketing presentation, are they planning to interview someone else, or are we going to be that last person, right? You want to make sure that you're able to get at those things. You want to make sure that everybody who is going to make a decision on this process is present at the time that you meet with them. Okay. It's very important to have all decision makers in the room at the same time. You don't want one of those objections that you're trying to handle be, well, thanks very much. You provided some great information. Let me bring my spouse, my children, my parents, my whoever in the room, and we'll get back to you, right? It's always best that you have a collective mind. That way you can answer all of the questions necessary at the same time. I guarantee that they're not going to be able to explain your presentation to someone else as well as you can. Okay. Find out the names of everybody that's going to be in the meeting. You want to treat everyone with equal importance. Sometimes we simply address the person that spoke with us initially, and we never actually engage the other people. When we know that there's many people who have to make a decision, we want to make sure that all of their objections and questions are handled as well. We want to start to talk to them about their replacement home. Again, that away from pain towards pleasure. If we can get them to dream, if we can get them in a position of them starting to create that vision of what their next property will look like, it's much more successful for us to get into a listing situation with them, because now they're thinking about their next home. And by the way, another assumptive close would be once we sign this contract tonight, you and I will start to look at what your next home will be. I'll start to send you properties, that sort of thing. We'll talk about price. That's one of those questions. What do they think? How far off are you in terms of what you think the home would sell on the market and what they're hoping the home would sell for on the market? It's important to have that alignment right up front. What's the reason they want to be on the market right now? Is it because the market's super hot? Is it because of a job change? Whatever it is, you want to understand their motivation to the nth degree. Make sure that you're thoroughly in alignment with them. You want to know all of the details about the property. You want to know what they know, right? Not just what you think you know. You want to know everything they know. And that includes the neighborhood, any changes that may be coming up in the community, all of those things, okay? Ask them, do they know what they owe on the house? That's another very vital, very relevant question. It's important because it speaks to what they're planning to put in their pocket, and it also helps to address what their buying power would be on their replacement home, on that away from pain and towards pleasure. Okay. Also, as we're asking the right questions and we're uncovering that hidden motivation, are there additional amenities that the property offers? Are there things within the boundaries of the HOA, like a tennis court or a community based swimming pool, that you need to know about? Are there restrictions that are in the neighborhood that you need to know about that may inhibit another buyer from purchasing? What criteria are they going to use when they're hiring an agent, right? Again, you want to be their last choice, and you want to make sure that that choice is you. Okay. You want to let them know a little bit about what your process is, what you plan to do post meeting, anything that there's going to be that you leave behind. Okay. Okay. Did you want to ask them if they own other properties in the area? Why is that important? Because those are other opportunities for you. It allows for potential other listings, particularly if you do a great job on this one. Okay. Again, as we're talking about that replacement home, get them to think about where it's going to be. And also, as you're looking at that replacement strategy, are they already working with a realtor? Right? If they're working with a realtor who's going to buy to help them purchase a home in another area, that would help you to understand if they're moving out of area, out of community, or out of state, and let them know that you know a number of people that can also assist in that process. So make sure you know your business. It's important when you're going on a listing presentation that you actually know what you're doing. So when you're, it's important that you make sure. Starting over. This is an amendment to the previous video. Okay. So it's important that you're always prepared. Make sure you prepare to be prepared. So what do I mean with a statement like that? When I talk about being prepared, amendment to a previous video. So prepare to be prepared, right? When you're going into a presentation, you always want to make sure you have all of your ducks in a row. It's important to remember that sellers want you to be the market expert and to do your homework in advance. They want you to be able to outrun the competition by being prepared. If you are in a competition, they should notice a big difference with you. So make sure that you're well prepared. Do a detailed market analysis. Make sure you know what has recently sold in the last 2 or 3 months, what might be relative to that seller's property. It's important to make sure your numbers are exact so the seller has confidence in you that you're aware of everything that's going on in the market today. Okay. Make sure you're creating a complete property profile report. What's in a property profile report? It lists who all the sellers are, so that you can make sure that everyone's present when you actually go to do your presentation. It helps you to understand the specifics of the property and to be able to identify the property correctly by its legal description. Lets you know how many bedrooms, bathrooms, the true square footage, the lot size, all of those things. So make sure to prepare a property profile. Identify any special assessments that might be attached to the property, like a Mello-Roos bond. It's horrible for a buyer to find out post-fact that there's additional monies that will be assessed to the buyer each and every month as a failure from the seller to provide. And by the way, this could also kill the sale, because if the seller does not provide you with this information and you don't do your own due diligence, it could mean that the buyer could cancel the property for failure to disclose. So make sure that you're doing your homework. I can't stress this enough. Physically tour the area around the property prior to the appointment. Drive around the neighborhood, see all the local landmarks, get a reference point to where schools, shopping, all of that good stuff are, nearby parks, any hazards that might be nearby to the property. Assess for things like freeway noise, road noise. Is it in a flight path? Is it near a train track? Anything that could disturb the habitability for a new buyer, you want to make sure that you're aware of. Okay. Dress professionally. Now, that doesn't mean wearing a suit and tie or pulling out your best suit or your best suit of clothes. Wear a clean button down shirt, nice, clean, wrinkle free slacks, clean shoes, right? Not spotty, not damaged, things like that. You want to present yourself in the best possible light. So make sure you dress professionally, whatever that means for you. Okay. Identify your goals and objectives prior to meeting with the seller. You want to make sure that you know why you're there, just as the same reason why is the seller there. Why does the seller want to sell? So make sure you've clearly outlined and identified your goals as well. Okay. Some of the benefits of planning are you're actually exercising your value proposition. You're able to uncover objections before they're brought up by the seller. This is what's called preemptive objective handling. You're actually covering all those things that the seller might bring up during your presentation, because remember, you're well prepared. Okay. Your presentation is clearly thought out, which eliminates some of the thinking on your feet. Now, when I talk about thinking on your feet, what I'm actually saying is when we're trying to come up with information in real time, it's thinking on our feet. It's kind of an improvisation. In a presentation, you really want to eliminate as much improvisation as possible. You want to make sure that you've done your homework, you know the material that you're presenting, you're giving the proper information to the seller so that the seller can make an informed decision. Super crucial, super important for you to do that, okay? Eliminate the thinking on your feet. Also, to the seller, you're going to look infinitely more organized. You have your act together. That's confidence building. Okay, it makes you look more professional. That customer is going to recognize that you're well prepared and that that's something that's consistent that they can count on. So they're going to gain confidence in you just by the fact that you are well organized and thought out. It's also important because you're going to mention all of those important points, right? When it's all stored in our head and we haven't practiced or rehearsed and we don't really know the things that are going to happen next, we sometimes forget to share those things with the seller, and then we share them at a later time. And it could be that the seller already knew those things in advance, is now wondering why you didn't bring them up. So part of that benefit of planning is that you don't forget to mention all of the important things that are necessary for the seller to make an informed decision. And all of your services are translated into benefits. Again, value is everything when we're talking about presenting a good, clear, and concise presentation. You really want to articulate your value, and planning is the best way to do that. Okay. Never go out half dressed, right? You've all heard that adage. Make sure that you're going out fully dressed. And what I mean by that, you've got all your tools in your arsenal. You've got all of your ducks in a row. You're well thought out. You know exactly what this property is that you're presenting. You're ready to go, okay? And you're building a strong groundwork for a positive relationship. That's the ultimate goal. Remember, a relationship with a seller or buyer, excuse me, is a relationship is building trust. And that relationship of trust is what's known as a fiduciary relationship. You want to start off from that first meeting, building that strong fiduciary capacity or that fiduciary relationship with your seller, okay? And it also puts you on a track to close, which makes it easier to close the transaction when it's time to close the transaction. Remember, in any meeting and any opportunity, there are multiple closes. You're closing with the seller on the appointment. You're closing on the seller to choose you. You're marketing in a way that'll bring a buyer. You're closing with the seller to choose the correct buyer, best price, least amount of inconvenience, all those good things. And it makes it much easier to close the sale. And it allows you to remain in control because you know where you're headed next, right? Again, it's like a play. You know what your next line is. You know what the next step is. You know when to coax the seller into putting pen to paper. You're not doing any of these steps too early because being well prepared allows you to know and feel out what should happen next. Okay. And it also enhances your communication with the seller. Remember, everyone, communication is everything. Effective communication is how we actually move our businesses forward. So let's make sure that we're well prepared so that we can communicate effectively. Okay. And finally, it shows the seller we've done all of the necessary research. We're not leaving anything off the table. The seller knows how much they're going to put in their pocket. They know what to expect from market conditions. They can glean a reasonable assumption of what buyer traffic should look like based on the information you're providing to the seller and all the market conditions that may hinder the property from being sold, or why the property may be sold in a record amount of time, allowing the seller to be prepared to move. Okay. As always, I appreciate all your time. Thanks for participating. Make sure you're applying all of these tips when you're getting ready to go on your next listing presentation. As always, take care. I will see you all next session. Hi, everybody. D. Wilmore, Head of Agent Development, responsible broker for Radius Agent. We're going to talk a little bit about closing the buyer. So we talked earlier about the differences between a seller and a buyer. We're really going to focus in this session on closing the buyer and understanding the buyer's motivation. So Thomas Edison has this great quote that I absolutely love. One of the greatest weaknesses lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is to always try just one more time. And why I think that particular quote is brilliant is, we've mentioned in earlier sessions, it's very easy to give up because we're receiving lots and lots and lots of rejection, right? Real estate, while it is a business of lifestyle, is also a rejection-based business, right? Because it's a relationship-based business, in relationships come points of rejection. So that quote is talking about getting up no matter how many times you get punched. That's one of the biggest success challenges, is it's not if you can get up, it's how many times you can get up after you get knocked down. And sometimes working with a buyer, you're going to get knocked down quite a bit. It's kind of the nature. So what's our agenda for this session? We're going to learn why we work with buyers. We're going to understand what the buyer's motivation is. We're going to outline the difference between a mortgage and a cash offer and why each has value and each may have some negativity. We're going to learn a bit more about cash offer strategies. How do we negotiate to win? Real estate is always a win-win proposition. We should always be negotiating to win. Keep in mind, the agent on the other side is always your ally, never your adversary. Okay, it's always a win-win proposition. We'll talk about tactics to move forward from contract to close, and finally, our outcome should look like you having the ability to close more sales through this learning process. Okay, so let's dive right into it. So what is our why when we're working with buyers, right? We already established that working with a seller, we know that a listing agent, or when we're working with sellers, we're more the employer than the employee, right? We're the ones that have the inventory. So why would we want to work with a buyer? We know that buyers are very data driven, right? They consume a lot of data. But the thing about that is buyers historically can't really translate this data in a meaningful way because it's so macro, it's so 10,000 foot above the ground that they have difficulty isolating between, what's going on nationally and what's going on in their local market. Okay. So if you think about it, real estate buyers are everywhere. You can walk right out of your front door right now and trip over someone who has an interest in purchasing real estate. So real estate buyers are everywhere. So what is a buyer? How do we really classify a buyer? Okay. A buyer is someone who's looking to experience property home ownership. When we talked about sellers in our last session, we talked about a seller is nothing more than a fulfilled buyer. They're no longer on the hunt, right? They are someone who had been a buyer at some point. They found the property they were looking for. They were fulfilled, and now they're off the hunt. So a buyer is someone who's looking to experience property home ownership. Statistically, first-time home buyers represent 34% of all homes sold. Okay? 34% of all homes sold are first-time home buyers. That's a staggering number. So that's a lot of folks who don't have experience in the process of buying a home. Okay? That's where your expertise and your skill come in. You're helping that buyer achieve that process of home ownership by sharing data of current market trends, showing the buyer what properties are on the market, showing them how they can negotiate to successfully win. All of those things fall in your domain as the licensee, as the licensed professional. The typical first-time home buyer is around 33 years of age in today's market, in today's world. Okay, this is dramatically younger than what it's been in previous generations. The typical repeat buyer age rose to an all-time high of 56 years old. Okay, so that's someone that we described earlier, someone who was a buyer, found the property they wanted. Now they're looking to buy their next home, right? They've acquired some equity in the home that they're in. They're looking to facilitate further investment. So the typical age for someone to buy another house is around 56 years of age. 14% of all home buyers are U.S. veterans. In other words, they served in the military. So in 2021, 14% of all home buyers were U.S. veterans, military veterans. Guys, that's a niche market. That's an excellent opportunity to pursue because we know that many veterans are using things like their VA loan or in California, a CalVet loan. Okay, so 14% of all home buyers were veterans. 11% of home buyers purchased a multi-generational home to take care of aging parents. So what is that? Because we have a generation that's starting to age out, in every life cycle, there's always a generation that's either aging out or dying out. So they're either selling off a large family home and moving into a type of assisted living or some type of senior residential care, or they're having their offspring, their children, take care of them so that they can age in home. We know that because of expenses, rising interest rates, some folks haven't returned to the job market, that many adult children are moving back into the family home or purchasing a home to where they can care for their elderly or aging parents as well. Okay, so adult children typically move back home to save costs. And keep in mind, it's a benefit not only for the parent, but for that adult child as well. So as we look at understanding the buyer's motivation, one of the biggest obstacles that face a buyer, I'm sure all of you know it right now. You're all thinking the same thing. Of course, it's financing. Where does the money come from? We know that purchasing a home is the largest cash outlay that a single individual will ever experience in their lifetime, right? From a down payment, monthlies that we pay each and every month, all those things are the largest part of our budget for most everyone. Not to mention the associated costs that go along with not with just the mortgage, but you've got taxes, you've got insurance, you've got upkeep, you've got all kinds of things that go along with home ownership. So it's our largest cash outlay is home ownership. Okay. Financing. So 87% of buyers finance their the purchase of their home. 87%, that's an overwhelming preponderance of people who are using leveraged money in order to purchase their house. 61% of down payment comes from savings. So these are people who've saved for months, for years, in order to have enough money to facilitate a down payment to purchase. Earlier, we talked about military veterans. We know that a military veteran using a VA loan can purchase a home with no money down. Okay, 56% of buyers used proceeds from the sale of a previous home. So it's interesting that 56% and 56 years of age kind of correlate. I don't know how they're related in this sense, but 56% of buyers use the proceeds from a previous sale in order to purchase. So those are either move up buyers, move down buyers, second home buyers. There's a number of buyers that fit in that category that you're able to pursue. And then 28% of first-time buyers used gift money as a source of their down payment. So they either got money from family, parents, things like that, in order to exercise the option to be able to purchase a house. 28% of first-time home buyers used gift money. Okay. So we know in the market that we just came out of, we know that there were lots and lots of folks who were competing with all cash. That's an unusual phenomenon. Typically, in a large purchase like this, people are leveraging money. In other words, they're putting a small amount or a smaller amount of money down, known as the down payment, towards the purchase of the house. And they're using banks and other lending institutions to furnish the rest. That's that loan to value, usually an 80%, 80-20 loan to value, something like that. But we've had this unusual market over the last 24 months where we've seen this cash offer phenomenon. So what is that cash offer phenomenon? The National Association of Realtors found that 14% of all buyers purchase their homes with all cash, right? Are people that liquid? Do people actually have that money available to them? Some people do, but some people are leveraging programs that exist now that'll allow them to appear as all cash buyers, okay? What is a cash offer really? What is it? What is a cash offer? We hear that all the time. A cash offer is an all-cash bid without any upfront financing. In other words, you're not using a loan from a bank or another lending institution. You're telling the seller, look, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I can buy this house. I have the money in my pocket, in the bank, wherever it is, without using financing. So why is that important? At the end of the day, isn't it all cash? Well, there's a few advantages to using all cash. One, which is it's more attractive to a seller. Why is it more attractive to a seller? Because it reduces the opportunity for the contract to fall through. Right now, the seller has something that they can sink their teeth into. All cash is meaty. Contracts can fall through because something happened on the lender's credit, or on the buyer's credit profile with the lender, to where now the lender is uncertain on whether or not they're going to actually loan either the money or that much money. So it reduces the opportunity for a contract to fall through. It's also a faster processing time to close. All cash, because there's no loan process, there's a whole lot of paperwork that's eliminated. So that reduces the time to close. On average, a mortgage loan takes around 39 days to close, right? There's appraisals, there's inspections, there's all kinds of things that go on that could push the time forward to close. And typically a seller may want to move on now. Maybe they've already located their replacement home, okay? There are fewer contingencies. Again, there are no loan and appraisal contingencies typically in an all-cash offer. There may be some inspection contingencies so that the buyer feels confident that what they're buying isn't going to fall apart in a couple of days, or that all the systems are at least functional as the buyer's moving. So there's fewer contingencies in an all-cash purchase. Again, loan and appraisal are usually absent from the offer. It's a simpler closing process, as I said, because there's much less paperwork when we're talking about an all-cash loan, okay? So what are some of the pros of a traditional loan versus a cash offer? With a loan, you're leveraging the money from a bank. So there's a smaller amount of cash outlay from you and a larger amount of money from another source. That's what's called leveraged money, okay? And we're working with low interest rates. I know over the last few weeks and months, we've seen interest rates start to tick up, but interest rates are still relatively low from what they've been historically, okay? It allows the buyer to establish a strong credit profile. When we're making payments on what's called an installment loan, installment loans are things like car payments, a mortgage. Those are the type of loans that take an equal amount of principal and interest, and you're paying the same amount over a fixed period of time. That's what's called an installment loan. Credit card loans are typically what's known as revolving loans. The amount varies, the monthly amount that you pay off varies, the amount that you're indebted varies. So typically a lender or establishing strong credit profiles, they look at that installment payment. So it allows the buyer to establish credit or a strong credit history. There are also contingencies that protect the buyer if they're in doubt as to what they're purchasing, because the lender has to be satisfied as well as the buyer. Again, we talk about it allows the opportunity to develop and enhance credit. What are some of the advantages of buying all cash? When we buy all cash, it gives the seller confidence that the offer will close. Because someone is bringing real money to the table, the seller has something to count on. They're not worried whether or not there's going to be a lender who's going to approve this or not. There's real cash that's on the table. Okay, so it increases confidence. It's quicker to close. We've talked about that. There is no effect on the buyer's credit. That's really more of a con than a pro. And the long-term financial savings are absent of interest. So there is no interest. So the buyer ends up saving significantly more money because they're not paying an additional amount. And usually it can be in the hundreds of thousands in interest over a 30-year amortized fixed mortgage. Okay. And there's minimal paperwork. We know that the paperwork is dramatically reduced because there is no loan process to happen. So it's a few documents to transfer the deed into the new buyer's name. Okay. So those are the advantages. So what are the disadvantages? So when we talk about a traditional loan, some of the disadvantages to getting a loan is there's lots of qualifying data needed to satisfy the lender. Have you been on the job for a period of time? Do you have established credit history? Do you have consistency of income? Is it expected to change? Do you have enough of a qualifying down payment to satisfy the lender? And the list goes on and on and on. So lots of qualifying data is needed to satisfy the lender under a loan scenario. So that can be a negative. Higher cost to purchase the loan due to interest. So interest is a long-term process. And historically, when we're purchasing something on an installment paying, we're paying more interest up front than we are principal. So there's an additional cost that's assigned to the purchase in that 30-year fix. So a $600,000 house could effectively cost a buyer $900,000 or more over a 30-year fixed period of time. It's less competitive in an active market. So as all of you, I'm sure, have witnessed in the market that we're coming out of, where there were multiple offers, cash offers were king or queen. They were rising above those offers that were presented with loan scenarios because some of the things we talked about, there's real money on the table. There were things that the seller could count on, quicker close, less contingencies, all those things existed. And additional inspections may be required by the lender, right? That could be a negative. Again, a lender's wanting to feel confident that the amount of money that they're loaning to the buyer is going to be safe, because the collateral that's used, which is the house itself, is going to stand for another 30 years. It's not going to fall into disrepair and lose value. So there may be additional inspections that are required by the lender. Again, it's a longer time to close due to the approval process. So it could take, weeks longer than a cash offer to close because of all those additional requirements. What are some of the downsides to using all cash? It requires lots of liquidity. In some of the markets that we live and work in, we're talking about multi-million-dollar properties. And to come in with $1 million, $2 million, $3 million all cash, that's a staggering amount of money to be liquid in. And the other thing is that liquid can't be leveraged anymore. So it's now tied into a fixed asset so that that money can't be used for other things, versus a loan to where you're leveraging quite a bit of money from a lender. So if you did have that money in liquid or in liquidity, you could use it for other things. You're also unable to take tax advantages or of mortgage related tax benefits when we're doing all cash. Okay. We talked about cash being tied up for the unforeseeable future. Okay. All of those things could be construed as a negative under both a loan or a cash offer. So, what are some strategies in using a cash offer? So, Radius Agent has programs. So, Radius Mortgage has things like a buy before you sell program, which allows the seller to buy a property before they sell their existing home. So, Radius acquires up to 75% of the value of the home, unlocking the majority of the buyer's equity to pay off any mortgages. That's a benefit when the buyer moves out. Radius Financing prepares the home for sale using expert designers from a proprietary vendor platform. So, what does all that mean, really? What that actually means is the person who's selling their existing home is able to buy their new house before they sell their old house. Typically or historically, we know that funds from the proceeds of the sale of the existing house are what's used to purchase the house. But under this method, it allows that buyer to buy a home before their home is sold because they're being given or granted monies up front in order to buy that house. And then when the person who buys their house moves out, or the person who buys that house moves out, we come in, we clean it up, and then we're able to resell it for top dollar. And then the balance of that proceed goes to to the person who bought the house. So it's a great program. We leverage companies like Fly Homes. We have a strategic partnership with Fly Homes, and Fly Homes has a cash offer consistent of two simple processes in order to complete a transaction. One is a short-term loan. It acts like cash. It's paid to the seller within 10 days. And, the other one is the buyer final long-term loan. So again, since there's technically two transactions that are happening, one which is to furnish enough money to the person who's wanting to buy in order to buy the replacement home, and the other one is the buyer actually getting into a traditional mortgage with some of those monies that had been advanced. So there's a couple of really cool programs out there. There's lots of data to share these programs for you. Okay. Some borrowers also leverage monies from like their 401k. They've been on the job a long time, or they have a fairly robust stock portfolio. They'll leverage. In other words, they'll borrow against the monies that are in those investment strategies, and that also helps them to look like cash. But the problem is, or it's not really a problem, but the issue with that is that in that scenario, even though they're theoretically not paying back that loan, they've got, additional debt service that happens because they're technically taking out a loan against that. But as they're presenting it to the seller, it looks like all cash. Okay. So, what are some strategies that we can utilize to negotiate for the win? Remember, I told you it should always be a win-win scenario. The agent on the other side is never your adversary, always your ally. That person is always your ally. They've got a house that they want to sell. Your client has a house that wants to buy a house, right? It's a win-win. We're simply coming together and figuring out what everybody needs to make the deal happen. It's always a win-win scenario, right? Get the listing agent on your side. Relationships are a natural component of the negotiation. And this is true in any form of business. Developing that relationship, people start to develop understanding. It allows you to understand that the transaction should be a win-win. All too often, we get into these adversarial relationships, or we start to develop this adversarial feeling because we feel like that person is working against us. In reality, they're working with us. They're doing the best for their customer just like you are, but the best is getting the two parties together to where everybody has a mutual agreement so the sale can move forward. Okay. Commiserate with the listing agent. We know that even though the listing agent is the employer, sometimes the thing that happens for the listing agent is the fact that, they've got too many offers. And sometimes that can be overwhelming for not only the listing agent, but for the seller as well. And everybody's trying to be the listing agent's friend. So now they're trying to decide what's a genuine offer that the seller could, potentially decide on. And keep in mind, it's always the seller who decides what offer to take. But it can be challenging. So commiserate with the agent. You know that you're not just calling to get all the information. You're calling to let them know, hey, I'm on your side. Whatever I can do to help, you know, what can I do from my buyer's perspective to help you make better decisions? All those good things. Commiserate with that agent. Ask about the true motivation of the seller or what they may need. Now, because of contract law, because of ethics and our fiduciary relationships, they can't tell you things like, okay, the seller's sick and they need all the money or things like that, because that's a violation of your fiduciary capacity. That's you disclosing confidential information. But when they talk about motivation, they can talk about things like the seller's already identified a replacement home. They really want to move quickly. That helps you to develop the strategies necessary for you to be successful with that agent. Okay. If it's not money, what is it? Do they want to stay in the house? Do they want no fees? Do they want reduced contingencies? What is it that they need in order to move forward? And those are some things that you could provide, by asking your buyer. Understand the market completely. I can't stress this enough. I've said this many, many, many times, is you have to understand what's going on in the market. That means everything that's been on the market, both past and present, what's happening in that neighborhood, because we know it's a neighborhood to neighborhood thing, not a big market thing. So even in your community, your local market is isolated by neighborhoods. There could be 2 or 3 neighborhoods that are clumped together that sell at a certain price, and just across the street they sell at another price. So it's important to know the difference in value in the markets that you serve, in the local markets that you serve. So again, making sure that you understand the local markets will allow you to price the home correctly. You're basing these things in fact, and you're actually getting the seller to be more realistic. Again, coming out of markets where prices were sky high and running amok and everything was crazy, it was very easy to just throw out a number and people were likely to accept it. Those markets are fading fast. Okay. So make sure you're pricing it according to what the market would support, not just based on the seller's whim or your whim for that matter. That's the listing agent piece, but it allows the buyer to come together with a more realistic idea of what they should offer. It's important that the buyer understand what their responsibilities are during the purchase. Part of that is they need to be prepared as well for variations or changes or adjustments in the market. Things can happen overnight. We know recently we've seen interest rates go up. As a matter of fact, just a short time ago, interest rates went up 75 basis points. That's a significant amount. That reduces the buyer's ability or the purchase power of the buyer. So make sure the buyer knows that as they're moving into this, that we're managing the expectations so that they have a realistic approach as they move forward. That's part of being prepared. That's part of the competitiveness. They have to understand your purpose, what you do and what you're providing. Okay. And that the win may not happen on the very first house that they go out. They may fall in love with someone, but someone else may also be in love with that house and have a stronger negotiation tactic. So make sure that the buyer understands that those are very real things that could happen. Recognize that in multiple offer situations, the buyer may potentially have to offer more than what the list price is. We've seen that over and over again. We also know that sticker shock is reality. Buyers are overwhelmed with what the price of homes are these days. So they're going to go through sticker shock, and you have to be prepared. Buyers are sometimes coming from areas to where $1 million got them 50 acres and a 7,000 square foot home. And they're coming to California and they're getting 1,200 square feet and barely a 5,000 square foot lot. So prepare for those things. Those are adjustments that you can help to manage. That's part of managing the expectation. Okay. Again, we talked about offering above the list price. An economist developed a strategy a number of years ago that for every offer that the seller actually has in hand, that means an offer written on paper, that we should be prepared to go at least 1% above the list price. So if there are 5 offers, you might be looking at 5% above what the price listed for the home was. So you need to prepare for those variables. It's important that you also understand what the buyer's true budget is. Where are they capped? How much can they really afford? Because you don't want to go above it. If the buyer has a $900,000 budget, you absolutely should start to look at $700,000 homes. You don't want to look at properties that are at 900,000 because the likelihood of you being successful in the negotiation reduced dramatically because you're right at the edge and there is no cushion. So always develop a cushion so that there, or a head, creating headroom so that there's enough for the buyer to go up if necessary. Okay. Remember that every listing is different. Don't fall for listing agents who price the home that is below market, clearly below market, because that's designed to capture so many buyers that everybody's going to bid it up and the seller's going to be happy. And that's never a win for you. And by the way, that's a bit unethical in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. It's the opinion of many other professionals as well. Ask questions of the listing agent. Again, doing homework. That's crucial in your preparation process. Make sure you know what you're getting into. Make sure your buyer's aware of these things. Okay. Offer terms. Minimize contingencies when necessary. Mostly it's time frames, right? It's always good to keep the buyer protected. I know in very active markets, the trend is to remove any and all contingencies, but down the line, people have regrets in doing that, okay? And they may be dissatisfied or unhappy. And if you're talking about building long, sustainable businesses, you want to advise the buyer accordingly. And at the end of the day, it'll end up being the buyer's decision, not yours. But you want to make sure, even in an active market, that you're encouraging the buyer to make sure they're doing their due diligence so that they know exactly what they're getting. Okay. Another helpful strategy is writing into the purchase contract itself that the buyer will pay a certain percentage above the highest and best offer received. Sometimes that can be risky. Sometimes it may be against your local MLS. So you need to make sure you confirm with your broker and with your local MLS that you're able to do that. Okay. Never offer too much, right? Again, one of the biggest instances of buyer remorse is you overpaid. None of us like to pay too much for something. There's the principle of substitution. I'm not going to pay more for something when I can get the same thing for equal or less without delay. Okay, that's the principle of substitution. And when we tend to pay more for something, once all the hype starts to dissipate and cool down, we tend to have major regrets. And that makes for an unhappy buyer, and that unhappy buyer is usually unhappy with their realtor. Okay, so make sure you're advising your buyer correctly. Keep in mind, the home still has to appraise, particularly in a loan scenario. The appraisal has to happen, and the appraisal is not going to just dial in with what the market's doing. They're going to go for what the home should sell for or what's reasonable. Okay. Make sure you determine in advance what are the deal breakers for the buyer. What are the things that the buyer absolutely says, nope, not doing that, not having it, no way, no how. Determine what those deal breakers are in advance. That way, when you get into that negotiation scenario, you know what your buyer will or will not do. Okay, it's crucial because you don't want to get deep into the transaction that you've already agreed to in your in contract with the seller. Now the buyer's like, no, I can't do that. It's not possible. Okay, you want to make sure it goes smoothly because you've done your homework in advance and you've already identified what the deal breakers would look like. Okay. Again, as we're talking about being prepared, we're talking about being ready to offer. As you're pursuing your lender, get a full documentation pre-approval letter. What does that full documentation pre-approval letter look like? It means that the buyer has given over their pay stubs, their tax returns. They've established that they have been employed for a period of time, and then they do have money to furnish a down payment. They've supplied proof of funds of where these things are coming from. All these things can be big burdens or hindrances once we get into contract, because the lender still has to go through that process. And the more of this you can do in advance, the stronger your offer is going to look. Okay. If you can, get a buyer to write a financial competency letter along with that full documentation pre-approval letter. That's saying that this person's been fully vetted by the lender, and now that lender feels very confident that they're going to provide a loan to that buyer. Okay. It's a very big thing. Ask your buyer to give at least 3% as a good faith deposit. That's showing the seller that you're serious, that you've got some skin in the game. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'm so serious about purchasing this property. Here's the money. I'm giving you 3% as a deposit to show you I'm serious. Okay? At least 3%. Again, showing proof of funds right up front is a clear indication I'm not screwing around. I really can buy this house, and I want this house. Minimize the time frames for contingencies or delays as much as possible. Again, you don't really want to have the buyer remove their contingencies because it's very risky. But if you can minimize the time frames, that'll reduce the delay and hasten the close. Okay? Let the buyer know up front that in the state of California, or in many states, all properties are sold in their as-is present physical condition, and the seller is not required to pay anything. In many states, the seller does have to disclose, but the seller does not have to make any repairs. So let the buyer know that up front, that particularly in a competitive market, seller's probably not going to fix anything. So be prepared for that. That may be an extra expense to the buyer, but at least it allows the buyer to be prepared. And whenever possible, absorb some of the closing costs that would be germane to a seller. These go a long way in a negotiation. These fees are usually small because the amount that the seller comes up with to close is much less, significantly less than what a buyer would pay. And in some cases, some of these fees can be rolled right into the loan. Okay. Present a cash offer whenever possible. If your buyer is so liquid and can leverage a cash offer or cash offer program, definitely, if you're wanting to be competitive in a strong market, that's the best way to go. Okay. Determine how quickly the lender can close prior to making the offer. And that goes along with that pre-approval letter. If the lender has all the documentation, they already know what the buyer stability is, more than likely the lender can close much more quickly. Okay, keeping those contingencies to a minimum. And then keeping a positive attitude with your buyer. People, this is a very overwhelming process for anyone, even people who've gone through the buying process before. We're talking about leveraging quite a lot of money. We're talking about buying a very large, expensive fixed asset. So it's important to keep your buyer on the positive side, that they're doing the best thing for them. When you start to align with negativity, like things that are changing in the market, things like that, it's very difficult to re-engage your buyer at that point. Okay, they're just going to focus on the negative. So always be aligned and focused on the positive. Okay. So when we talk about being prepared and always being prepared, remember that buyers want you to be a market expert. It's important that you present yourself in that way, and that's you being very prepared. Even if you've never done a transaction before, each and every one of you can do the research in advance in the markets that you plan to work before you meet customer one. And it doesn't take a lot of time. Back in the Stone Age days, to when there was no computer and you literally had to go to county offices and libraries and local places versus being able to do it at your fingertips in your car, at your house, or wherever you are, because of the speed and the information in the internet, it was very difficult. But now you have access to this stuff very quickly. So be prepared. If you know you're going to work a specific neighborhood, know what's recently transacted in the neighborhood. How many properties have been for sale in the last 6 months? What new things are going on as far as building? Are roads being reconditioned? Is there a new library or park being built? Things like that. Be very prepared. It makes a big difference. Okay. Just as you do with a seller, you're going to provide the buyer with a detailed market analysis, what's called a competitive market or comparative market analysis. And what that actually shows is properties that have been for sale in the last few months, properties that have gone pending in the last few months, and properties that have sold. It helps to determine a true price so that the buyer can make an excellent decision. Okay. That property profile report also establishes for the buyer who the owner is, when they bought it, what they owe on it, are the taxes current, all those kinds of things. Those are all negotiating strategies. If the taxes aren't current, it may help you to ascertain that the seller might have some financial difficulties, which may allow for a negotiation. Okay. Identify any special assessments like Melrose, HOA, those kinds of things. It's horrible for the buyer to all of a sudden have a property that they fell in love with, only to find out now they've got to pay some additional things like a Melrose bond, or they have homeowners associations that they have to pay each and every month, right? That reduces the amount of what they can afford because they now have to pay more. So make sure you've identified those things in advance, not at the time that you're writing the contract. Provide the buyer with an amortization schedule based on the purchase price. What that amortization schedule tells them is how much principal, how much interest they're paying each and every month, and how it changes over the course of that 30-year fixed period of time. A great tool that you can download is Carl's Mortgage Calculator. It'll, at a blink of an eye, share all that information with you, and you can actually email that amortization schedule directly to your buyer. Okay. So download Carl with a K, Carl's Mortgage Calculator. It's a free tool. I've used it for years. Phenomenal tool to use. Okay. As always, everybody, we've come to the end of another great session. I really appreciate everyone's participation and attention. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or concerns. I look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thanks, everyone, for your participation and your attention. Go out and get some solid sales going on.